The president-elect used to threaten to walk away from Japan and South Korea if they fail to pay more for the privilege of hosting U.S. forces for their own defense.
Yes.
And even he indicated he might encourage them to pursue an independent nuclear capability. What's your take on Trump's East Asia policy?
I tend to think that these are ideas that he formed a long time ago. You did hear this kind of thing, that Japan was not paying enough for defense. I suspect that once he understands more clearly that basing U.S. troops in Japan and Korea is actually good for the United States and good for our friends in Asia, once he understands that Japan and Korea are actually paying a lot already in various ways, once he understands that if there is a war, the U.S. will be there in a supporting role, not the primary role. I'm sure that the Pentagon is ready to brief him at any time on these and other issues, and I'm taking a wait-and-see attitude. I guess I'm more concerned about his economic policies.
We can talk about that later.
Okay. On the nuclear issue, there may well be some evolution, and we shouldn't infer too much from what he said in the campaign to draw conclusions about what his true policies will be.
How about the U.S. and Taiwan? Do you think it's a good time to Taiwan spend more on the weapons?
Well, the first thing that Taiwan needs to do is decide what weapons it really needs and what weapons it can afford. The United States defense establishment and Taiwan's defense establishment have had a lot of discussions about what is the best defense strategy for Taiwan in light of the changing threat from China. Based on that defense strategy, what kind of forces and what kind of equipment does Taiwan need? And that's a very good discussion. That's a very mature sort of discussion. I think that there will be opportunities with the new administration to continue that discussion. Certainly, Taiwan needs to spend an appropriate amount for defense, but it also has to spend the money on the right things. I think the DPP government has a pretty clear sense of the challenges that it faces in the defense area.
What's the perspective from Mr. Trump's side? If he's going to be hard on China, is he, will seek favorable relation with Taiwan?
Some of the people who are associated with the campaign appear to be very good friends of Taiwan. Mr. Priebus, who's now going to be the White House Chief of Staff, we're told, went to Taiwan a couple of times in the last year, and that's good. What the details of our relationship will be going forward and how they might be different from what was done in the Obama administration, we'll have to wait and see. Actually, our relationship with Taiwan is in pretty good shape, diplomatically, politically, militarily, economically. There's still some things that could be done, but I think that if the Trump administration is willing to look in an objective way at what the Obama administration has done, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. So let's talk about the economy.
Sure.
Would you say Mr. Trump will carry through his position about China in this campaign, like slapping a 45% tariff on China's trade?
Well, this is another area where I think his policies are a work in progress. The people who say that China's economic policies and behavior do not necessarily benefit the United States are right. There are ways in which China is acting in a mercantilistic or protectionist way, and it does need to change those policies if there's going to be mutual benefit. I think that our companies are much more negative on China than they were 8 or 10 years ago. And that should be a matter of concern for Beijing. On the other hand, you don't want to use a sledgehammer to kill a flea. You want to use the right tools to deal with problems. And you have to think through the unintended consequences of this tool or that tool. So for example, slapping really serious tariffs on Chinese goods. Who gets hurt by that? First of all, because of global supply chains, the Taiwan economy, the Hong Kong economy, the Korean economy, the Japanese economy are all involved in producing goods that have a made in China label on them. Yeah. My iPhone is partly an American good, it's partly a Taiwan good, and it's partly a Chinese good, but it has a label made or assembled in China. And so if you slap a tariff on that, you are hurting yourself and you're hurting your friends.
They're going to a lot of collateral damage.
Yes, collateral damage. The other people you hurt are here in America. You know, where does a company like Walmart source its products? China. So if you put a big tariff on Chinese goods, Walmart has to charge more for the goods it sells. And to whom does it sell these goods? Average Americans, the sort of people who voted for Donald Trump. So he's hurting his own supporters by slapping tariffs on China. You really need to think through what the consequences are for this step or that step.
So do you just suggest them start to, touch base on each other first?
Well, I think the first thing is to get a full briefing from agencies of the U.S. government who have been responsible for the conduct of our economic relations with China. And among the things that would be learned is that there have been negotiations on a bilateral investment treaty. And the main purpose of that treaty is to open up China more to American investment. The United States is already pretty open, right? This would be a treaty that really benefited the United States if it was done well. It has to be done well. It can't just be token openness or superficial openness. It has to be real openness. But a lot of people would benefit from it. And once the new team has a good grasp of the complexity of our economic relationship with China, then engage with them on identifying the most serious problems and discussing ways of resolving those problems. If that kind of dialogue doesn't work, then you need to think about some sort of sanctions.
The U.S. has always treated Hong Kong as an economic entity separate from China.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if situation goes that far, the U.S. need to, impose a sanction on China. How does it affect Hong Kong's economy?
The effect is probably less serious than it would have been 20 years ago, because 20 years ago Hong Kong companies were very involved in supply chains that reached into Guangdong province and elsewhere. That is not the dominant way in which the Hong Kong economy now interfaces with the mainland economy. It's much more in the areas of finance and places like that. But if there was a serious downturn in U.S.-China economic relations, it would certainly hit Hong Kong. It would certainly hit Taiwan.
How about trade deal?
Trade deal?
Yeah, Mr. Trump is not likely to move forward with TPP.
That's right, and that's a big, that should be a matter of great regret because this was actually a good deal for the United States, but that's just my view.
But is he going to renegotiate other deals?
Well, I hope not. Here again, you have to go into the details and understand, first of all, that, if you're going to demand concessions from the other side now has the opportunity to demand concessions from you. Second, you have to consider the collateral damage from either canceling a deal or rewriting its terms. There are a lot of sort of types of activity that have grown up based on this trade agreement or that trade agreement, and you probably end up sort of hurting yourself in some way. I hope that the agreements that we have that are in place and that are working are kept. It's not possible to pass TPP in the near future, then I hope we'll find other ways to liberalize economic relations with China and Taiwan and other places. A bilateral investment treaty for China and a bilateral investment agreement for Taiwan. I think both of those would be in the interests of all the parties concerned.
Without TPP, is China going to be the big beneficiary from U.S. backing out from TPP?
Well, I think that its leadership role, it will gain some advantages in playing that leadership role. Whether RCEP is actually as valuable as TPP in changing the rules of the game is another question. I'm sure Japan will want to exert itself to try and have the leadership role. If the end result of this is a free trade agreement of the Asia-Pacific that looks a lot like TPP, but just has another name, that wouldn't be a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Actually, the free trade agreement of the Asia-Pacific was first advocated by the Bush administration around 2005. And it's actually not a bad idea. And, if it was designed to be open to all APEC members, which is what the Bush administration advocated, then that's a way for Taiwan to get in. So that would be good too.
All right, thank you.
Sure. No, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Richard.